Happy Saturday, everyone. Josh's severe weather. Is everybody having a great weekend? I can't hear you even if you are or aren't, but leave a comment for me if you like. I'll try to get to it. But anyway, I hope you guys are enduring the first winter storm of the season for those of us in the Northeast, first significant winter storm, and really in a couple winters. But we're just getting started here. The weather pattern is going to stay very active here in the upcoming week. And unfortunately, if you do have travel plans, I am expecting there's going to be some widespread issues with not just one, but two storms coming up here in the next week. So we're going to take a look at what's on the table here. And there's a big storm likely to move through the central US early in the week and then heading to the eastern seaboard. That's going to produce some big time rainfall on top of areas that are dealing with snow here today into tomorrow. That's coming later Tuesday and early Wednesday. Unfortunately, that's not going to be it. As we head towards the end of next week, Friday into Saturday, colder air is going to wrap in from the north and west, and we are going to have a significant storm which cuts up through the Great Lakes. And that is going to set the stage for what I think is going to be a major snowstorm, potentially a blizzard for some here. The best chance I have highlighted in purple, but that will probably shift as we're still a little bit too far out to make any bold predictions. But anywhere in the blue, I think you're going to be potentially impacted by major wind and some snow. And we also could see some severe weather for the Gulf states. And unfortunately, another big rainfall coming for the eastern United States, maybe starting a snow for some here in the interior of the Northeast. But the flooding potential from this system may not be quite as great as the one before it, but it's just going to add to the misery that we're dealing with here on the East Coast. So let's take a look at the setup here. And this is the European model from earlier. I don't have the latest one yet. It's probably trickling in. But you can see what the setup looks like this weekend. One storm moves out here off the east coast of New England here tomorrow. Next storm system moves through the southwestern United States, and that's going to draw a lot of Gulf moisture up with it. It's going to strengthen, and we're going to have ourselves a powerful storm system over the Ohio Valley and the lower Great Lakes here later Tuesday into Tuesday night. There'll be cold air out ahead of it. You see this big high here over eastern Canada. That's going to supply enough cold air to generate heavy snow on the northern and western side. But we're not going to see a brutally cold air mass following it, at least not yet. This is Tuesday night. As we move further into the week, though, we see this storm cutting up into eastern Canada, likely a big snow for folks up there. And then another storm following in its wake here. This is Thursday afternoon and evening. And this time we've got much colder air set to come in, courtesy of a piece of the polar vortex. And that's going to bring in some extreme amounts of cold from Western Canada down into the Northwest, the Northern Plains. And eventually that makes its way eastward in waves here over the middle and second part of the month of January. So this storm is going to generate more wind with it, potentially heavier snow rates. And now we've got ourselves a good supply of cold. You see these brighter colors indicating higher surface pressure. Those are the denser, colder air masses. Those are the ones that can generate major snowstorms. And we have a lot of uncertainty. So I'm going to kind of talk about the trends and where this next storm goes. But this is Friday evening. Storm center somewhere around St. Louis, but of course that could shuffle a few hundred miles in either direction. And then it heads up into eastern Canada, and we see powerful winds behind it, very cold air blasting into the plains, and in between the two, likely to deal with some blizzard conditions somewhere here in the Great Lakes, and then cutting up into parts of northeastern Canada, or at least northeast Ontario and central and northern Quebec. That's going to head out. We're going to see very cold air in place for the end of next weekend and for Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday. Very cold air in place, and that should shut off the amounts of fire hose rain we're seeing in the southern and eastern United States with this cold air mass coming in. I think it's also going to help set the stage for what's going to be a more interesting, for those of us that want to see some winter weather, interesting pattern for winter storms much farther south across the southern US and into the mid-Atlantic states. But I don't want to get too into depth for that because I think we do have a lot of time before we take a look at it. This is the GFS model, and you can see powerful storm system centered here over the Red River Valley here tomorrow, Monday night. That cuts up through the Great Lakes, brings a lot of mild air up the East Coast. Doesn't follow with extremely cold air, but the next one does. And you can kind of see this cold lined up here across the Northwestern Territories, Nunavut here in Canada. That's going to drive cold air much farther down in the wake of our next storm system. And it's going to get a lot colder next weekend behind that storm. And then we have to keep an eye on what does come down through this base of this trough. Typically in an El Nino, we can still have more active weather over the southern US, but because of the cold air lodging itself downward, This does shut off the high chance for storms to cut up through the Great Lakes and instead favors more of a southerly path across the southern U.S. and maybe up the East Coast. Again, the time frame for that's going to be after the 15th and probably more likely after the 20th. And here's a look at how our temperatures fluctuate. Right now, no extremes in place here the next couple of days. In fact, it's going to get milder here across the Northeast, even in the wake of this snowstorm we're dealing with. This is Tuesday, but you can see some pretty intense amounts of cold beginning to build in Western Canada later next week. And that is going to invade behind our next storm. You see a pretty powerful gradient here, much milder than average temperatures briefly on the East Coast here next weekend, but that follows with a huge drop in temperature and much below average cold, some of which could be almost as intense, at least in the Northern Rockies, as what we saw right before Christmas last winter at the end of 2022. I don't think it'll be quite as extreme, but certainly we're seeing some of that cold, that intense amount of cold coming down here. And it's going to come in waves. We're going to see kind of some back and forth, but you can see more cold coming. And this is actually something that down the road here could favor some more action across the southern and eastern U.S. It may take some time to get that to happen, but I think we are going to start seeing that later in the month of January. And here's the reason why. This isn't going to be something you typically see on your weather reports. The Arctic oscillation, though, is staying negative, meaning colder air will continue to drop down into the Western Hemisphere. And it comes up a little bit, then drops right back down, staying negative throughout the next few weeks. The North Atlantic oscillation is negative, and what that allows is, or what that shows is that there's a block of higher pressure over Northeast Canada and Greenland, and that will allow colder air to come in first in the west. And you see it does come up here, meaning we could see at least something here in the southeast towards maybe the 22nd or after the week of the 22nd of January, but then starts to drop again and staying negative. So there is certainly some favor in seeing some potential winter weather. And then the PNA, this is negative, meaning the southeast is not cashing in on the cold. This shows more cold in the west with a negative PNA, but it is going to trend positive here around the 25th. And that will certainly allow more of this cold air to make its way into the southeast, even into Florida, although to lesser extents than those of you that are maybe up in the I-20 and I-40 corridors. So let's move along here. First storm moving through the Northeast. Got a lot of rain, cold rain here in North Carolina. Things should quiet down. Some severe weather across parts of Florida, but this will turn into a pretty good thumping of snow overnight tonight into tomorrow across portions of southern and central New England and eastern New York. Not so much for the big cities. Next storm dropping down from the northwest. That's going to very quickly link up with this active southern jet and bring the threat for severe weather here Monday and Monday night down south, and then Tuesday and Tuesday night across the southeast. That exits, and we've got another one behind it, not even yet on the map. NAM model shows you the first storm here. It's going to put down some pretty significant snow, even in places like Boston and in the higher elevations. And this is lunchtime tomorrow, still snowing across New England. Another piece comes through the eastern Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, but that one will be weaker. And then finally, that winds down Sunday night. Here comes our next storm circulating over the plains. We see moisture pulling northward, very wet on the Gulf Coast on Monday into Monday night. The NAM doesn't go past Monday evening, but you can see there will be snow across the plains and all the way up into Minnesota. And then here's the next one that's going to drop down and be a problem here Friday into Saturday. So very active weather. This is a look at the official forecast. And you can see still a pretty sizable storm over central PA and especially northeast PA, eastern New York. Higher elevations are favored, but we may see amounts getting up close to 20 inches for some here in interior parts of New England and in the Catskills. So it's still a pretty decent storm and some wind affecting Maine and especially down to Massachusetts, providing somewhat of a nor'easter feel to it. Not traditional nor'easter, but certainly has that feel to it. That's this storm, but here we go taking a look at, and I don't want to leave you out in Canada. We are going to see 20 to 25 centimeters of snow south and west of Halifax here, probably about 15 centimeters in Halifax, and we'll see a little bit in Newfoundland. But the next storm is the one that is a little bit more concerning for severe weather. Here we go on Monday afternoon. We see lots of isobars off the Gulf. That moisture is plentiful. It's heading northward. We'll see significant snow over parts of Kansas, northwest Oklahoma, northeast New Mexico, near blizzard conditions possible. And this will bring some snow to the Chicago area, but how much is still somewhat uncertain. Same for St. Louis, because as I mentioned, we don't have a really deep supply of cold air just yet. We have some cold air wrapping in, but it's storm generated. It's not air mass generated. And the difference is that storm generated snow is very localized compared to air mass generated, which will have that cold air overtaking the storm, allowing stronger snow rates. So this is a big rain event up the East Coast. And unfortunately, Tuesday night, a complete washout, strong winds possible, just really looks bad. And then we see some mountain snow behind it. But the next one moves into the northwest. This will be a very active storm. And we see it takes a little bit further track to the south, maybe not quite as much severe weather by Friday and Saturday, but a better chance of seeing some snow a little bit deeper down. And this is the latest GFS model, and this will shift. So don't get too obsessed with this. This is still 6 days away, 7 days away. But you can see a track generally up the Ohio River, north and west of it. We have the potential for a major snowstorm, maybe blizzard conditions, a lot of cold coming down. South and east of it, we could see severe weather, but maybe a bigger threat for heavy rainfall and some major flooding coming for the eastern seaboard next weekend. So if you're planning to travel next Saturday, do expect to see, once again, major issues here in the eastern United States, and especially around the Great Lakes. This looks like a very nasty storm. We don't know exactly how much snow will fall and how windy it will be, but it does look like that's a pretty decent chance of happening. And then behind that, the cold air floods in, and we see very cold weather in place for Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday the 15th. The Canadian model, actually, honestly, this one has been very interesting because the model run before it showed a much different storm track. In fact, it brought heavy snow. Let me see if I can get that for you. This is the first storm, but the second storm suppressed it to the south, but brought heavy snow into the mid-Atlantic and northeast. It has backed off on that, but it's drawn the GFS more towards it. I'll show you some comparisons. Here's the GFS, which is trending in that direction because the model run before it, I'm sorry, that's a Canadian. Let me get the GFS out for you. The GFS, on the other hand, has been kind of trending eastward. You see how it's shifted from Lake Michigan this time next weekend in time to closer to Lake Erie. That's a pretty big shift. So it's trending towards the Canadian. The Canadian's trending back towards the GFS. And they do agree somewhat, not a lot, as you can imagine, 6 to 7 days from now, but some agreement, which gives me a little bit more confidence in what could happen here. Here's a look at the GFS snowfall here from the next system. Big amounts in the southwest, pretty decent amounts across Kansas and northern Missouri, and then up maybe towards Chicago, we see some significant snow possible here, starting later Monday night, continuing through Tuesday, winding down Tuesday night. But some potential to see a foot of snow here, according to the GFS. The next one, though, is aimed farther south, and this is just one model run, so don't go freaking out yet, but shows some major snow across the Ozarks and Oklahoma, right up the Ohio River. Indianapolis kind of included in this. The run before it, and I'll show you that in a little bit, was farther north and west. And again, there's not a strong amount of agreement yet. Here's the European on the left. Here's the GFS on the right. And let's flash forward here to our next storm. And you can see the GFS favors more snow closer to St. Louis, while the European does not. With the following storm here over the weekend, you see they're actually in somewhat of an agreement here. This was, of course, not the latest European, but the one from before it. And the newest GFS and the older European are in pretty good cahoots here, where we've shown some pretty significant snow from central Missouri and eastern Kansas right on up to near Chicago and up towards Detroit. But as you're going to see here, the latest GFS has shifted that farther south and east. Here's a closer look at that here as we get towards the weekend. Whoops. And you can see that same model idea, which showed the heavy snow over Iowa, northern Missouri towards Chicago, has shifted it south and east. So there's a chance we're going to have some windshield wiper effect here where it shifts east in one run, back the other. Again, it's way too soon to make any call. I just know that this is going to be an impactful storm, and my confidence level in that is high. The confidence level in the details still is pretty low at this point. So stay tuned this week. I'm going to give you more on details as we start to get closer to that event. Winds with this next storm could be pretty significant across the Tennessee Valley here Monday night. We'll have some severe weather along the Gulf Coast. Big time wind up the eastern seaboard here, unfortunately, for Tuesday night. Winds may gust over 80 miles per hour. Not a lot of model trend difference here, but the next storm is where we start to see more differences. And this is the latest GFS model compared to the one before it. And we see some shifting in where the strongest wind will be. The earlier models had it across Lake Erie. The newer models are a little bit farther to the east over the mid-Atlantic region. So generally speaking, there's still a lot of uncertainty on where the strongest winds will be, but do see on both of these runs that wind speeds over 40 miles per hour look to be a decent possibility over the Ozarks, over the Heartland, over the Ohio River Valley, and especially around Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. So keep tuned if you're in Western New York for that. Rainfall, GFS, again, pretty good agreement on our models that this is going to be a major storm on Tuesday into Tuesday night. 2 to 3, maybe even 4 inches. Parts of New England could see 3 or 4 inches of rain. In fact, the trend is wetter across Maine, unfortunately, which you don't want to see here for Tuesday night and Wednesday. But here's the next storm, and you'll see it's not going to produce quite as much rain with it as the one this weekend, but it's going to produce a lot more liquid back in the Midwest. So be prepared for that. I do think it's going to be pretty nasty. A look at the GFS ensemble for St. Louis shows average snowfall from the next 2 storms may get up close to 10 inches with a few outliers that are over 20. That's St. Louis. Here's Chicago. Those amounts are going to be higher. 2 storms in Chicago, maybe a 4 or 5 inch storm followed by another 4 or 5 inch, but the potential is high. The ceiling is pretty high here, close to 30 inches for the next 2 storms. This is Indianapolis, and we don't want to wish the worst on Indianapolis. I know you guys want to see some snow because you didn't get it last winter, but you definitely have some good chances here coming up with the model mean showing potentially 10 inches of snow over the next 2 storms here. Detroit a little less, closer to 7 to 8 inches, but you can kind of see the trend there. And here's the national blend of models showing a lot of snow coming here in the interior of the Northeast with this weekend storm, a lot of snow out west, feet of snow coming. I've talked about that in my last few videos. Here's the next 2 storms. We add more to it here around the Great Lakes, and then the one behind it continues to build up the snowpack. And by the time we get to the middle of January, things have quickly changed from this time last month. Now we're seeing a lot of folks seeing a lot of snow on the ground, and that snowpack can magnify the amount of cold that we deal with here later in the month of January. So be ready for that. Severe weather, again, we're going to see some of it in Florida this afternoon and evening. Not going to talk a lot about that. The next storm has a lot of firepower with it here over the Red River Valley as we get to Monday night and Tuesday. Very fast winds aloft. Pretty favorable setup here for some damaging winds and maybe some tornadoes. The storm behind it isn't quite as favorable for that right now, but that can still change. So this is a look at Friday afternoon and evening, and it sure highlights Texas and Louisiana being in a favorable spot for severe weather. But it's still a pretty robust system here with lots of wind flow aloft. And the bigger change, or the bigger thing you'll see with this versus the first storm, is that there's a lot of cold air bleeding in at 500 millibars. That's about 20 to 30,000 feet aloft. So a lot of cold air coming down very quickly here behind the storm. And I think that's what's going to get injected into our blizzard here. Severe weather threat for Monday here, slight risk from southwest of Houston through southern Louisiana and Mississippi into southern Alabama, western Florida. That threat shifts eastward Tuesday, includes a lot more of the Florida Peninsula, all the way up to Raleigh, North Carolina. And damaging winds are probably the primary threat here, but we will probably have some flash flooding, and I do think we are going to have a few tornadoes, unfortunately. So have multiple ways of receiving alerts for that. Lots of moisture with this. You can kind of see the push of moisture coming through here very quickly on Tuesday. Lots of precipitable water, very wet patterns setting up, and we repeat that, unfortunately, for next weekend. So we're definitely in a very active pattern here. Cape is the amount of storm fuel in place for severe weather. It's pretty significant around Houston and Galveston here Monday evening and Louisiana Monday night. It does start to fade some, but Florida still has quite a bit of storm fuel on Tuesday here and somewhat even into the Eastern Carolinas for Tuesday evening. We lose some of that, but we have enough that can sustain a stronger thunderstorm. The storm behind it, the GFS is still modeling some pretty good storm fuel across Louisiana on Friday, but not quite as robust by the time we get to Saturday. It is there though. In fact, this latest GFS run shows enough storm fuel for a possible thunderstorm all the way up into Maryland and even the Susquehanna Valley of Pennsylvania. So stay tuned on that one. You can see in the longer term here, just bowling ball after bowling ball coming through here. Very active storm track. Things are less active as we head into the following week, but you will notice that the cold threat and the storm threat in the southeast is appearing to climb some. And I talked about this in my winter outlook. This is not uncommon for El Nino, that the second part of the winter takes off when we see better chances for cold and wintry weather in parts of the south. So stay tuned on that, but it looks like the start of February is going to be pretty unsettled. And if you're a winter storm lover on the East Coast, this is what you want to see, although it is several weeks away. Thank you all so much for your time today. Hope you all have a great weekend. Please be safe out there. I think I see the sun coming out here in Raleigh, so that is what I like to see after a miserable start to the day. I thank you all. You guys mean a ton to me, especially those of you that have been with me from the get-go. But I give all the glory to God. He's called me to do this. This is my gift to you. I just want to bless other folks by preparing you for damaging weather. And whether or not you believe, I just wanted to share real quick a verse that I think is very powerful and impactful to me. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, King James Version: trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. And I just want you guys to understand that those who trust in the Lord don't have to do it all themselves. God can sit there and let go. You can let go and let God do what he needs to do. He's created all of us, whether or not we choose to believe in him, but not having to try to figure it all out ourselves and allowing God to bless each of us with different gifts is what the world needs more of. And acknowledging God, he's going to direct you in every way. He directed so many folks in the past, from biblical times to today, and he will continue to direct us no matter what we choose to believe. But if you acknowledge him, then he will bless you in many ways. I'm using his blessings to me to bless you in this way. So I'm happy to pray for you no matter what you are going through. But I'm always praying for everybody on here. And I really do believe in the power of prayer, whether or not you choose to. And I'm not going to judge you. I just want to pray for you no matter what. Hope you all have a great weekend. Catch up with you again Monday morning. See ya. Oh, there's my hand.